Hello, hi. Hello and welcome to another episode of PR Roundtable. For those of you who don't know me, hello, my name's Kate. You might recognize me from such places as your inbox, because normally I do the behind the scenes part of these shows, trying to set them up. Today's show is a bit different because I've decided to try hosting it as well. So if you want to wish me luck, please do. There's a chat box just below the screen. Oh, hi, Caitlin. Oh, already. How nice. But yeah, there's a chat box just below the screen. If you have any questions for Chris, or if you just want to say hi, uh, just type in there and we'll put it into the show. So today's show is all about technology, namely how different technologies work, how you can use specific tools to save time on usually mundane tasks, and the ways that developments in technology can change how we work in the future. So to talk about that and to give us some insights into the PR of the future is data genius and my personal hero, Christopher Penn. So you might already be familiar with Chris because he has done like a lot of stuff. He has published, I think, literally dozens of books. Pretty sure some of them are award-winning. He can clarify. He has a podcast. He has co-founded a data analytics company. He does tarot card readings, and also quick draw archery, which I found interesting, and which I also think puts him in good stead to talk about the future of technology and what's to come. So if you'd like to say hello in the comments, welcome to Christopher Penn. Hi, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us here. It's good to see you again. Yeah. So part of what I wanted to get onto later in the show is this whole future of PR idea. But for now, I just wanted I have to ask, how much of the future of PR thing comes from the tarot card readings? Be honest.
None of it. Tarot cards and all things that are like that are rooted in human psychology and behavior. They have no scientifically proven validity in any kind of repeatable context.
So you're saying that they're not like machines because they don't do these repetitive tasks.
They don't, and despite people's wishes for things like the supernatural to be true, we just don't have any provable evidence that is the case. There's a lot of really cool things that are true, but that's not one of them.
One day. Okay, well, just to set the scene a bit, introduce you more on the off chance that someone somehow hasn't already seen some of your incredible content, which I do highly recommend. So you're not only running Trust Insights with your co-founder, Katie Robert, but you're speaking at shows and events like this one. Like I mentioned, you have your own podcast, and there's the avalanche of books that you've produced. You've got your own Slack community, and I imagine you do like a million other things whilst the rest of us mere humans eat and sleep and do all that stuff. So I was wondering, I'd love to know, how did you arrive at where you are now? Like when did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I don't know. I'll let you know when I grow up someday. In all seriousness, I originally my career started I was an IT guy. I started in technology. My first job was the CIO of a nonprofit. And then I started working at a financial services company in the early 2000s as the CIO, the CTO, and the guy who cleaned the restroom on Fridays because it was a 3-person company. And what happened over that decade was that technology and marketing converged. It became what we now call marketing technology. And then in 2011, Google Analytics released its first multi-channel funnels, which was a huge deal because multi-touch attribution did not exist for anybody except enterprises prior to that point. And suddenly it was accessible to all marketers. And it was at that point where I had changed industries. I was in the email marketing industry for a few years. Then I went to join a PR firm for 5 years, a company back then called Shift Communications. And I spent 5 years and changed there before it and the industry went one direction, and I wanted to go in a very different direction in my career. So Katie Robert and I, who was actually on my team at the time, we decided we would co-found Trust Insights, sort of a change management consulting firm with a huge data science component, and do our own thing. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are now.
So was that the split that you saw, that marketing was going one way that wasn't informed by data, and then you wanted to go this other way? Although, of course, a few years ago, the big buzzword in everything to do with marketing is being data-driven or being data-led. So I guess it's sort of come back around. Is that a big lie?
So here's the thing. A lot of people say that such and such is data-driven, but when you look at what they do, they're not. Data-driven fundamentally means you make decisions with data first, right? That's the simplest way. And you and everyone are literally data-driven all the time, right? Every time you pull out your smartphone and you put a destination in the map application of your choice and hit give me driving directions, that is literally being data-driven. You set a destination, and the machine uses the best data available to get you to that destination. And it may be some twists and turns you didn't expect, but you generally get there. What you're not doing is relying on opinion. You're not relying on instinct. You're not relying on the ways you've always gone. You're following what the machine is telling you to do. Because hey, the way your favorite way to go there might be currently be blocked by construction today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. In general marketing and in PR and everything, there's an awful lot of decision-making happening that is not data-driven, right? The worst case is always what we call the hippo problem, the highest individually paid person's opinion, right? And
yeah. I think we're all
and that is the
familiar with that.
antithesis of data-driven. That is the opposite. If you're going to say that you're data-driven, you must make decisions with data first. You can have other inputs in there. Clearly, obviously, if the data tells you to do something and it is antithetical to things like your ethics or your values, then don't do those things, right? Because there's a whole bunch of things the data could suggest you do that wouldn't be right. But you start with data, and it is the heaviest weighting factor in your calculus.
So that's interesting, because you're just saying that it's a term that's commonly misunderstood, as I'm sure many terms that are even remotely technological are. So like machine learning, I'm sure most people don't know what that is. I only know it because I Googled it earlier. But so these little misunderstandings. What do you think, in your experience, have been the things that people who think that they need a certain tool or a certain type of software most misunderstand about how it fundamentally works?
There's a couple of things that are at work, especially in the PR industry, about people's understanding of technology. And we see it even in simple things like Google Analytics, right? For example, could you credibly sit down and explain what the difference is between the 4 core metrics of Google Analytics: the page view, the unique page view, the session, and the user, right? Those are the 4 metrics. Can you explain the difference between them? Most people cannot. Most people can't. And as a result, if you don't know what those mean, you can't make decisions from them. But you can't say, I understand what this number is telling me, and therefore I make a decision. So when we apply this to any technology, if you don't know what it is, you don't know why it's important, you don't have the foggiest idea of how it works, then at best you're going to misuse it, and at worst it's going to do nothing for you, or it's going to be a counterproductive waste of time. The same is true of data, right? Think about data. Data is so important because data is our best attempt at representing reality, right? It is our best attempt at making something objective. It has been such an eye-opening and disheartening experience the last 18 months of seeing huge populations of people make incredibly bad decisions because they don't understand data. They can't read data. When this whole pandemic started, one of the things I started doing was reading clinical papers, preprints and peer-reviewed papers on sites like the Journal of the American Medical Association, Stat News, etc., and learning how to interpret those results, because this was a high-stakes situation I wanted to get right. So when guidance came out about what kind of mask to wear, well, what are the different kinds of masks you can wear? There's data, published data about all these things, and say, okay, well, this one's the best one's going to wear this one. When the vaccines first came out, you have like that moron that you went to high school with on Facebook, sharing their uninformed opinions, or you have actual data that says they are safe and effective. And yet an astonishing number of people have chosen to listen to the moron from high school who was drunk most of the time in high school, as opposed to the opinions of credible scientists who have said, like, yes, this thing is safe and effective. You should use it. Data represents reality. And if we do not understand it, if we do not pay heed to it, and we can't interpret it and take action from it, then we are worse off, right? Clearly, as we're seeing in the United States of America, 99.7% of emergency room cases right now are people who are not vaccinated. They chose the wrong data, right? They chose to believe the moron from Facebook. They chose not to believe the credible data. And so the credible data says this is reality, and then there's the moron on Facebook.
Yeah, but the moron on Facebook has memes. So, I mean, that's part of it. It's appealing to the public versus numbers, right? Although I'm sure there's another conversation.
It's a relevant conversation because a lot of people in the scientific and technical communities have said we need to borrow from marketing and PR. We need, SciComm and MedComm, being able to talk to people and to simplify things. There was a fantastic video right around the beginning of this year from, I forget who it was. I can't remember the guy's name, but he put together a TikTok meme of just this explanation that was technically correct about how an mRNA vaccine works. It got 100 million views, as all things that take off do. And it worked. It worked in a way that people went, oh, so that's what this thing does. And so, yes, absolutely, the data needs someone's help to communicate what it is saying, right? Data itself is just an ingredient, and you need someone to cook with it to be able to create a final outcome. But if you don't even believe can you imagine a baker who did not believe in the existence of flour? How would that work?
Very avant-garde cakes, I think, is how it would work. But so you mentioned, for example, using Google Analytics and not really knowing what the different bits do. Incidentally, I think you have a blog post about that because I've been more or less stalking you for the past week to swat up for this conversation. But like a part of that, and also with the idea of having data and being able to work on it, but also being able to disseminate it in a way that other people understand. There's a lot of this crossover between different departments happening. And you've seen that more and more over the past decade, where PR is going away from being just a publicist role, at least for people who hire agencies who understand what agencies are supposed to do. And there's overlap between them and, say, like product, marketing, certainly social media. I'd say like the CEO position in the company as well. It needs to inform everything. I guess my question is, does that mean that me as a PR manager, like I would need to know how to use all these tools, Google Analytics, whatever else? Because normally you'd have a digital marketer whose sole job it was to just take care of those tools because they're complicated. You need to keep up with them. Do we have to do it all?
Yes, everyone has to do it all.
Like, here's the thing. So what's the problem?
Public relations is something that is fundamentally misunderstood by most of its practitioners. We are in a situation now where public relations is actually living up to its name, where you, as a communicator, can relate to the public, in many cases, disintermediated. What people think of as public relations is actually traditionally media relations, where you go to journalists, you go to sources and stuff like that, and you're pitching stories. And today, the technology permits us to go straight to the public. We don't need an intermediary. It helps. And certainly the media landscape has changed radically, where someone on TikTok may have far more reach to your audience than, the Wall Street Journal or CNN. And so we have to change our understanding of what public relations means. It means you are developing relationships with the public in all these different channels. So a big part of the reason why the industry has had such a hard time with all things data and all things digital is because it fundamentally misunderstands what is possible now. It is possible for you to go straight to your audience, for you to develop a relationship with your audience, and to circumvent the media gatekeepers that until 15 years ago, it essentially defined your job. You may not have to write a pitch to, so and so at The Verge or Wired, whatever. You may be able to go to 20 people on your mailing list saying, "Hey guys, share this thing that we're coming out with this thing. Would love your input on it." Today we have all sorts of fancy names for it, influencer marketing, community management, social media marketing, but it is all the same thing. It is all people relating to the public with these new technologies. So the logical corollary to that is that you, as a public relations practitioner, must know how to relate to the public in the current reality. And this is where we come back to data, because remember, data is our best representation, objective representation of reality. So when you look in Google Analytics and you suddenly start seeing in your sources, hey, look, TikTok is in here. Are we doing anything on TikTok? I don't know. Somebody did something on TikTok, right? Reddit is in here. What's Reddit? I don't know. What's Slack or Discord or any of these things? Who's this person linking to us from an OnlyFans account? Like, what are all these things? You have, and the onus is on you, the public relations practitioner, to use the tools and use the data to understand the reality of your situation and then adapt to it based on what your best understanding of things is.
So you're saying that if I had a PR agency, now's the time to hire, say, someone who can do digital, who can inform me in this way, or learn it myself, I guess. But it just sounds like there are a lot of parts to this that a single person probably wouldn't always want to do or have the passion to do. Because there are a great many PR people who aren't interested in how Google Analytics works. I am one of them. So yeah, it's hard. So do we think about expanding?
There are two things that you must hire for, right? Aptitude and attitude, right? Aptitude is, do you have an affinity for things that are mathematical or analytical in nature? And then the attitude is, do you enjoy those things? To your point, though, use your word passion, right? You can teach anybody any tool. You can teach anybody, how to push buttons in a sequence. You can teach anybody a task if they have the aptitude and the attitude. When I started reading clinical papers and clinical trials last year on all things related to COVID-19, I don't have a lick of medical experience, zero, right? But I can read and I can learn. And it was very important to me to understand this topic. So I had the attitude, and I can read and I can learn. So I have the aptitude. Now, in no way, shape, or form would I ever represent myself as a medical professional, right? There are people like Dr. Akiko Iwasaki at Yale who are there 40 years of their life have been spent on immunology. In no way am I comparing myself in any way, shape, or form to them. But as a layperson, I can say, okay, I at least, when I see this headline in the news and I dig into the evidence, okay, I can understand what that is. As a PR practitioner, do you need to be a Google Analytics certified professional? No, but it does help. Do you need to be able to look at Google Analytics and understand the basics? Yes. One of the weird things that people do is we have this very binary perspective, and it's gotten worse, of either you don't do the thing at all or you must be an expert at it. And it's like with cooking. You either can't cook or you're a Michelin star chef. Like, no, there's a big spectrum in between. I can't cook. I can boil water. I can make toast. I can make pasta. I can make, pasta carbonara. I can make an Alfredo. Okay, I'm a cook. Right? So there's a spectrum. And so with analytics, the same thing is true. I don't use Google Analytics. There's a Google Analytics certified professional. And then there's a whole range in between. But you have to have the aptitude and the attitude. So one of the first things you have to do as a PR manager is understand, and this is something that Katie and I talk about all the time, you have to understand the people that you work with. What are their aptitudes and attitudes? You may find, like with content marketing, you may have people writing, giving them a blank Google Doc. It may be terrifying to them. And so they'd be like, okay, that person is not a creator. Let's not put them in creative situations. So you have to figure out what are the aptitudes and attitudes of the people that you work with so that you can put the right people towards the right problems.
Sure, but I guess that also works for if you're working with clients, because I'm inclined to think that. In fact, I'll ask you because with Trust Insights, you offer things like having tech stack audits and things to do with data mining stuff that I'm not going to go into because I'll use some terms that are clearly incorrect because I'm not that deep into it. Um, but have you found that people see the value of that sort of activity when it comes to PR, either from the PR side or from the client side, who just wants to have more of an agency for their brand?
People want generally the same things, right? At the end of the day, you're hiring us or you're hiring a company like Presley or somebody to save you money, to save you time, or to make you money, right? Those are pretty much the big reasons why somebody brings in either of our companies. And so we offer all these things, but in reality, what we're trying to offer is, and the fourth hidden one is cover your butt, right? So a manager brings us in to say, hey, I need help justifying why I should still be employed at this company. And so from all those things like a tech stack audit or uplift modeling or attribution modeling, these are all techniques, right? It's like they're all techniques like baking and broiling and grilling. The question is, what outcome do you want, right? So if a client comes to us, imagine a person walking into a sushi restaurant saying, I want a beef Wellington. And people are like, what are you doing here? Like, this is a sushi restaurant. We will serve that here. Go to the steakhouse down the road. In the same way, when we try to figure out, and work with clients, the question is like, what outcome do you want? And do we serve that here? If we don't serve that here, probably not going to be able to help you. And so the big that's always a challenge is, do you have a problem we can help you solve? If the answer is no, then it's a waste of everybody's time to try and put a square peg into a round hole.
Absolutely. And so a few episodes ago, we had Ginny Dietrich. Everyone knows who she is. Everyone knows who all of you are. You're all great. She came on the show with Laura Sutherland as well, and they were talking about how you need to have a strategy for what you're doing, and a big part of that is working out what it is that people actually want you to achieve, like what the end goal is, and finding a good way to measure that. Because there's, like, I always think that there's so many like analytics you can pull out of anywhere. So I can say, hey, I shared this on Facebook and it's got this many likes, and you're like, I'll report on that, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone. And it's the sort of mismatch of, I guess, intent and how you measure things. So there are actually two questions that I wanted to ask you. One of them is more to do with measurement, because I know a lot of PR people struggle to match those things up, to say like, okay, well, I did this campaign. It was for, like, I know, brand awareness or something, and now I think more people, like, I think that was successful, but I can't give you hard numbers to justify my existence. What if you can suggest specific tools for you to use for that as well? That would be excellent.
So here's the thing. What is the outcome that PR generates? No, I'm asking you, Kate. What is PR's end result?
Well, hopefully that someone knows about my company and has a good attitude towards it.
Exactly. Awareness and trust, right? How do you measure those things? Everybody has the ability to gather that information. You can do things like surveys. You can do it with polls. And the one that drives me up a wall is, in a tool that's free, like Google Search Console, you can see how many people are searching for you by name. Like if you went to your Google Search Console and you measured week over week how many people type in the word Presley, and I'm sure the 28 misspelled variations of it. How often do people search for that? That is your brand strength, right? That number tells you how many people have even ever heard of us and had the presence of mind to Google us by name. Why people in PR don't use that, I don't know. Other than A, they don't know it's there, or B, they don't know how to get at it, or C, they can't do the mathematics to make use of it. But it's such a powerful number that people are asking Google. They're not asking their friends. They're not asking on social media. They're not asking opinion-based stuff. They're literally Googling for the name of your company. How often does that happen? You can measure it. And so that's one of my favorite metrics that is so driven by PR and brand spend and things like that, so that people are aware of you and they trust you enough to at least look for you by name. Like if they didn't trust your company, they would probably, maybe do some negative searches like, is Presley a scam or something like that. But, barring those things, those would be searches that would be really important.
Sure, but perhaps part of that as well is going back to the idea of we have to do everything now. So there's too many tools, and if I'm someone who isn't familiar with any of them, where do I start? I'll probably Google it. I'll say, which tools do I need to use? And then I get just the sort of generic, I'm not going to name any names, but like tools that people use that have been around for a long time that may not necessarily fit what I'm trying to do. And along that line, I want to ask, like, how do I choose which tools to invest in, or rather, what should everyone consider? Like, which of these tools should everyone consider using?
It depends. Like there's 4 fundamental sales models, right? There's the complex sale where there's a buying committee and a whole bunch of people are making a decision, right? And so you have to be able to measure environments like that. We typically will call that B2B, but it's not. It's complex sale because there's just as many buyers in a mortgage or in a college education or things like that, at least in the USA, that those sales look like an enterprise software sale. Then there's the simple sale, right? Somebody goes to a website, swipes their credit card, and buys the thing, whether it's some weird stress ball that you bought on Amazon, a pack of chewing gums, something like that. You swipe your credit card, and there are plenty of B2B companies that fit that mold too, right? You go to, I'm sure you probably can do that on Presley's site, right? You can sign up for a demo or just swipe your credit card and go. There is selling through somebody else. So you make a thing and then you give it to a distributor, and the distributor or retailer then sells it to the public, B to B to C. That's a third major sales model. And then the fourth model is we have non-financial sales. Like if you're a politician running for office, how many votes did you get? It's not a monetary thing. But all 4 of these things have different models and then different software and tools and things to measure what's happening at each stage of the sales process. And so the critical question that you have to ask as a PR practitioner, and then especially as a measurement focused practitioner, is what information do you have access to from the tools that you already have or should have that are either part of the process? Like, for example, if you're in a complex sales environment, and you hopefully you have a CRM, right? If you don't, you probably want to change companies because that company's in a lot of trouble. If you're in an e-commerce company, hopefully you have e-commerce software. Most companies have a web analytics application like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. Most companies have access to a search tool like Google Search Console, which is free to everyone. Those are the starting tools to try and look at what's happening at each stage of the funnel. I would be very, very reticent to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff because there's 5 fundamental things that you need, and tools are only one of those 5 things, right? You need, if you are, let's say you're going to cook something, right? You need an outcome. Like what am I trying
You're
to cook?
very hungry, right? Sorry, is this a freelance call?
I use food analogies a lot because it's something everybody can relate to. You have an outcome, right? If you're baking a cake, it should look like a certain thing. It should have a certain texture and a certain taste. You have an outcome. You have hopefully a recipe, a set of processes that will let you get to the point of creating a cake. You have ingredients, right? You have the person, your skills and abilities, right? Some people can't cook. You give them a recipe and they still manage to screw it up. And then you have the tools, like a blender. For example, if your outcome is a steak and the tool you have is a blender, it's not going to go well. It's going to end pretty badly. And so when people are talking about tools, what software do I need? What do I, stuff like that. That's one of those 5 things. And yes, it does matter, but it matters more. Do you have the right people? Do you have a recipe? Do you have the ingredients?
So I'm not disagreeing with you, although it's going to sound like I am. I guess the flip side of the question then is, what tools should we reconsider using because they are out of date, or they're commonly misused, or they're not going to fit? Because something, and it's not just around technology or PR, but something you always hear is, if someone is just doing things in a not most efficient way, and you're like, well, why don't you use this thing instead? You'll be a lot easier. Why are you tenderizing that steak with a blender? Have a mallet, you know? Um, and they're just like, well, we've always done it this way. It works. So why should we change it? And how do you get to that point of knowing you want to change it? Do we need to hire an external agency to come in, like a consultant to come in and tell us and like reassess? Oh, that's what you do, isn't it? Very smart, Chris. Jameson to sales
that really is a lot of what a company like ours does, is to say, like, what are you doing? Like, open your recipe book, open your pantry, bring us the people and stuff, and see what you're doing. Because yes, sometimes there are better alternatives, right? And sometimes there aren't, or the alternative, that the change to cost is the cost of change is so high that it isn't worth it. Other times you can see massive savings, but it depends on what's happening situationally and where the problem is. You will find that if the tool is the problem, then upgrading or changing out the tool will probably be the solution. If the people are a problem, if the process is a problem, changing the tool won't matter, because you're fixing the wrong problem, right? You can change out the blender 8 times you want, but if your ingredients are sand and you're trying to make cake, that doesn't matter how good the blender is. You're still making a cake made of sand, and nobody wants a cake made of sand. In the same way, in public relations, right? You can have like a newsroom of some kind, you know, and you can get really fancy newsroom software. But if nobody ever visits it, what does it matter, right? If you have 2 people who visit your newsroom, so what?
Absolutely. Okay, so I mean, that probably comes from an oversight, right? So someone has made the newsroom, they filled it with wonderful content, but then they haven't thought about the distribution side of things, perhaps. So in that case, in your experience, what do you find people overlook the most? What should they be giving more thought to?
Those 5 things in order. What outcome are you after?
Sand, right? Blenders, steak, cake. Missing one.
What outcome are you after? What processes do you have in place to get to that outcome? Do you have a recipe? Do you have a playbook? Do you have a cookbook? Do you have something, a roadmap that shows you how to get there? Do you have the right people, right? If the people, you have the wrong people, it doesn't matter. Do you have the right ingredients, right? If you're trying to be data driven and you forgot to install Google Analytics on your website, guess what? You have no data. Tool's fine, data's bad. Can't do anything. And then, of course, finally is the tool. So those 5 things in that order are how you figure out what somebody has overlooked, because it's going to be different at every company. Every company has its own strengths and weaknesses. So like us internally at our company, one of our bigger weaknesses is actually process related, because I'm a pain in the butt to work with and I don't document things well. And so there's always process gaps around that. The people are fine. Our data is really good. Our tools are great. And the other time, at least for my own work, sometimes the outcome is not clear. Like, what, you know, Katie will often say, so what? Why did you create this thing? What does this thing do? What's the point? And so those are kind of our gaps. Now we have another client where the people are the problem. Holy smokes. They have some people who are in charge there who have no business being in charge, who don't know what they're doing, who are working with 10-year out-of-date knowledge, and have massive egos and such arrogance that they refuse to listen to customers. At another company we worked with a few years ago, they had silos. They had process silos that were people driven, that were so rigid that they were broken. I kid you not, they hired us to capture data from third parties about their company that they had internally, because there was a regulatory wall, self-imposed, that said marketing may not have data about the company. Like, can you imagine? Like,
I cannot imagine. What? No, I genuinely cannot. Is this like, was it governmental?
No,
It's
it was a big
but
tech company. It was a big tech company. there was
Outrageous.
a different company where sales refused, would not let marketing see any information, none. And so marketing was like, we don't know how to calibrate our efforts. We're like, you can't, because sales isn't telling you what leads are good or bad, because you can't see any of that data. And so those are companies where people and processes so broken that, again, doesn't matter what tool they use, no, because they're never going to get the right answer.
That seems like such a clearly bad idea. You're like, is this working? Shh, I'm not going to tell you. But why? We're on the same team. That it's very peculiar.
Yep.
You also mentioned So What? Because I know that's, again, I've been stalking you. That's a show that Katie runs, isn't it? And it's pretty good. When you talk about these sorts of things.
Yes, we
From
have a live
Facebook,
stream
right?
every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time called So What? And the name of that show comes from Katie often asking me, so what? Like, what does this mean? What are we going to do about this? And so every week is an exploration of an issue and the so what? Like, what's the point of this?
Oh, it's great. I'm going to keep watching that even after this. Then, like, I don't have to. So I'm not held to account to keep up with what you're doing, but all your stuff's great, so I will. One thing I did, we sort of covered a bit, but I want to have it as a solid one-off question is just how can we save time? What tasks can we delegate to the machines?
The joke in the development community, it's not a joke, more of a rule of thumb, is if you have to copy and paste it more than 3 times, it should be automated, right? When you look at the work that you do, and the level of quality expected of you, there's a good chance that some of the things that you can do can be automated. I'll give you an example. Social media content curation is something that at my old agency, I would watch junior account executives and account coordinators spend literally 8 hours a day, every day of the week, curating content for clients. And I'm like, this is stupid. Um, you just need to find the content that's topically relevant. So I ended up, when we launched Trust Insights, I'm like, I'm not going to spend that time. Um, I can get a machine to identify content worth curating and just do that. And so my social media scheduling for the week is I log in up Monday morning. I run a script that pulls from a database that's always running behind the scenes, and it gives me 2 files to export to Agorapulse, which is our software that we use for scheduling. And I've scheduled my social media for the week: 40 posts on Twitter, 8 posts a day for 5 days, and my Facebook page, and that's that. In 5 minutes, I'm done. And it's all content that I would have shared anyway because I tuned the machinery to identify those topics. So that's an example. There's an even more compelling example, because if you think about like the average press release, right? The average press release is not the world's most compelling thing. I'm going to share my screen here. And Jesse, if you
Yeah,
can
please
bring up
do.
the shared screen. This is a press release that from Business Wire, and you can see here I've highlighted the yellow part. That's the prompt. I'm going to feed that to a machine, and I'm going to say I won't feed the machine the second half. Try to autocomplete the rest of this press release, and what it came up with um, is actually better, I think, from a reading perspective than the original. So it's top streaming brands, information about them, and stuff like that. So what this thing has done is autocomplete and essentially build me a first draft of a press release. Now, is this going to be award winning? I can go turn off the screen sharing here. Is this going to be award winning? No. Is it going to win a Pulitzer? No. Is it good enough for a first draft? Yes. It's good enough that I could hand this off to an account executive instead of them spending 6 hours, trying to squeeze out boring words about a boring company. They can instead edit what the machines come up with for the first draft and save a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, I think that's a really good example of one of the ways that maybe we will see people using technology differently in the future. Because right now they're like AI, oh, Cylons and you know, Skynet. Because that, I mean, we all watch films rather than read about technology, and that's fine. But there are tools like this, like those what GPT-6
Yes, so that
JC.
was built with
I don't
a
like them.
model.
That's
Yes,
the
that
open
was built
source
with a
version of
model
the
called
GPT-3
GPT-6.
one. Yeah.
Well, GPT-J6B is the model name. But what we have to remember about AI and machine learning is really simple. It is nothing more than math. At its core, all AI does one of two things. It either does classification, aka labeling things, or it does prediction, aka trying to figure out what something means. In this case, even though it's a very sophisticated model, all it's trying to do is predict what the next logical words, sentences, paragraphs would be based on an enormous amount of data that's vacuumed up. Anytime that you would use classification software like topic modeling, it's just saying, of all the words that you just gave me, what words in this pile of words are the most important? And that's really all AI can do today.
Yeah. Yes. But again, like people don't understand that. So it's again, I guess, finding a way to stay somehow informed about developments in technology or just how people use existing technology as well. And always, I suppose, dreaming about how your work could be made better with that. Because I imagine, like I might be writing a press release and I'll think, oh man, this is going really badly. I've just written a pile of rubbish. Maybe if only a machine could give me a first draft, and then I don't understand that something exists that can give me a first draft just because I'm not in the loop with those sorts of things, which I think is one of the big challenges here.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear that people have around these technologies is what is precluding them from taking advantage of them. So, for example, do you need to know how a blender works? Yes. Do you need to, if I hand you a crate full of parts and say, build a blender, can you do that? No, but you don't have to, right? You just have to know that things go in the blender spins around really fast, things come out of the blender, blend it up, right? So you know what the machine does. You don't have to know the inner workings, the electromagnets and the motors and stuff like that. You just have to know what this thing does. You have to know that if you put junk in the blender, it comes out blended. It's still junk. It's not any better. It's just junk that's blended up now. And machines like this are the same thing. Given any piece of marketing technology, what does it do? What goes into it, what comes out of it. And that's the basic level of understanding that people need to have. So to your point, if people don't know it exists, well, how do you know what exists in, if you're shopping for a blender? You go and look at other blenders and see, oh, that one's pretty cool. And you ask friends and you shop around and figure out, oh, for $800, I can have this blender that can, blend up an iPhone.
The
same
so
is true of marketing technology. Yeah, stay and surround yourself by, if you yourself don't necessarily have all the time, surround yourself by people who are innately curious. One of the most important personality traits to hire for is curiosity, is somebody to say, hey, I am interested, I'm passionate about this thing. I am so passionate about this thing that I spend my personal time outside of work looking at this thing. That's how you know that, if you have a content creation role, see if that person, for example, is writing fan fiction or speculative fiction or something, or is drawing their own art or composing their own music outside of work. If they are, then they love that thing.
I feel very seen now. It's like you've been reading my fan fiction. No one should read my fan fiction, but it's fine because no one can find it. It's under a very carefully buried pseudonym. Anyway, you mentioned just before this about social media and how you plan out your social media posts. In a recent Marketing Over Coffee podcast episode, which I really enjoyed, so you and John touched upon the social media algorithms and how they're changing, and this idea of they're prioritizing human posts by individuals and then burying sort of organic posts by companies. So unless, I guess, to inspire you to spend money on ads instead. So in that case, is the companies posting social media, unless they're really good at it, like I know MoonPie, which I don't know if you're familiar with the MoonPie Twitter, but it's great. It's just the personality of a MoonPie talking about how the moon left him and the moon now has his estranged son or something like this. It's great. But unless you have something like that, then is there a point in a company continually posting to social media now?
It depends. You've got to look at your attribution models. You got to look at your analytics and see, what does the data say is the objective reality? And you have to do a cost benefit analysis, right? If say 50 people visit a week from your Facebook page to your website, right? And you only spend 5 minutes a week curating content, because you've automated it. Is it worth continuing to do that? Maybe, because what is the expenditure it takes to get 50 visitors to your website, right? from a cost benefit analysis, that may make sense, even if it is 50 crappy little 50 people a week. On the other hand, if you're spending 5 hours a week for those same 50 people, now your cost benefit analysis changes. So the real question is, what does the data show you? And then what's your trade-off? What would that, it's, what economists call opportunity cost. If you didn't spend at that time doing social media, what else would you be doing? If the answer is, oh, you're working on our email campaigns, which have, 10x ROI, oh, great, then you should be doing that instead. If the answer is, I'd be getting coffee and gossiping at the water cooler, well, then do the social media, because that's more beneficial than gossiping at the water cooler. It always comes down to what the data says.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I agree. Good, great answer. And social media, of course, is like another sort of new, no longer very new channel, but comes channel for people to throw their information out there. Which leads me nicely to my next point, which is, how is the way that people interact with brands changing, and what are the comms channels that we need to be paying greater attention to? And in particular, like what I always think of here is Discord, which is basically, for people who haven't used it before, it's Slack before Slack existed. And the entire gaming community uses it and still does. And PR people who work within games will use it because that's where the people who play their games are, and like where journalists go as well, and they can have this community interaction. But that's widely overlooked by pretty much everyone else. What else are we missing?
There's a ton of stuff out there. The easiest way to figure out what you're missing is to take a channel that you get high response on, like email, whatever, and ask your audience, hey, where do you spend your time online? YouTube is a social network. Granted, what some of the comments you get on your YouTube channel will make you question whether or not the human race has any chance of survival. But besides that, it is fundamentally a social network. I use Slack and Discord. I spend most of my time in Slack and Discord because they're great channels. They're private communities. For those people who have a lot of gray in their hair like I do, you will remember that they are fundamentally a different service called IRC, Internet Relay Chat, from the 90s, with a fancy app on top of it. That's all it really is. And it's the same thing that we've been using for years. By the way, Discord is a lot more than gaming now. It is a massive, massive set of communities. There's hundreds of thousands of Discord servers being set up monthly. We just ran the numbers on this last week, and it's off the charts. Things like TikTok, right? Again, if your audience is there, you need to be there too, but you will only know about it if you ask people where you spend your time. For, a hot minute last year, Clubhouse was everyone's darling. And for some people, it still is. And that's okay, because that's where that audience is. But you have to ask people, where do you spend your time online? And then go where your community is saying to go. For some people, you mentioned fan fiction. Archive of Our Own could be a place that group of people spends their time, right? You have to ask your audience. If somebody is in, the mature entertainment business, OnlyFans may be a place. That's a social network too. You have to know where your audience goes. So that's always the advice. And this is the part that drives me up a wall. Brands don't ask people where they spend the time and where you would like to hear from them on, right? There's a whole industry around people texting, right? Being able to brands text. Well, if people actually want to hear from you, give them that option, right? If something like Slack is where a community wants to be, that's fine. If you want to have a bulletin board, web-based bulletin board, going back to the early 2000s, well, guess what? There's a certain group of people where, particularly like in the cybersecurity community, they will not go on Facebook, period. They will not go, but you can provide a secure, safe environment. Mattermost is a self-hosted community similar to Slack and Discord. Again, very popular in the cybersecurity community because you can run it on your own server. You have total control of the environment. There's no tracking. There's no data sharing. There's no Big Brother watching you. So that would be, again, something that you would ask your community. Hey, if we set up a secure server that you could audit, if you were in cybersecurity, would you participate in there? You probably get some very interested people doing that, but you've got to ask.
Absolutely. And like, it all goes back to like the like the softer science of like PR rather than technology here. I mean, you're uniting them both, but it's the PR side that's saying, look, who are we actually trying to reach and where are they? And this is just a new way of doing it. So you mentioned a few tools there, and also just a few channels. So I know you have an awesome newsletter that you do. You have your Slack community. You have, I mean, not to mention podcasts, everything else, whatever. What are your favorite comms channels, and that you, particularly ones that you think are completely underrated that people often overlook?
Slack and Discord for sure. And I say this because we run a Slack community of 1,900 folks. If you want to see it, you can sign for free. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, all lowercase. And it's powerful because it's a community. There's no algorithm. So what people post is what you see. That's the nature of Slack and Discord. But more importantly, it's a community of folks who are in a place that you can ask them questions to, and more important, listen to what they have to say. Again, this kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, which is public relations. This is your public. If your public can be, persuaded to join a community like a server on Discord, like a server on Slack, you can then relate to that public by listening to them, asking them questions, having conversations with them. And that's why it's so underrated. I am always astonished at the number of marketers and the number of communicators who don't actually want to talk to the public. Like, they will do anything to avoid talking to people. I'm like, why are you in PR? If you bring those people into a place where they can interact and you moderate it, you set the rules, you say, yeah, if you're going to act like a jerk, we're not going to let you in here. Then you have the ability to listen to people and hear the questions they're asking and build a powerful, not just a PR strategy, but a business strategy. One of the best business examples I've ever seen of listening and applying what you listen is T-Mobile. They were a client a few years ago. And their strategy from like 2013 to 2019 was really simple. They called it the uncarrier strategy. And all it was they built a long ass list of everything people hated about cell phones, crazy plans, multiple billing options, weird fees, all this stuff, 42 different plans, 16 devices. And they said, okay, we've got a list of everything that pisses you off. We're going to stop doing these, one at a time. We're going to stop doing this. And wouldn't you know it, the carrier grew from a bit carrier. They absorbed Metro PCS. They absorbed Sprint. They became the third largest carrier in the USA because they figured out, hey, if we piss people off less than our competitors do, we'll win customers. And it came from basically just listening to people. And so for public relations, relating to the public, these are, the tools matter, but the strategy matters even more of relate to the public by listening to them and then use that data to make decisions.
Yep. Makes lots and lots of sense. I've just realized that we're coming to the end of the show, which means that if anyone has any questions, please send them in. And if we don't have time for them, I'll put them in an email afterwards and we'll get them in.
There's one question here in the chat thing.
There is a question. I can see it. This is fine. It just says, is aptitude/attitude the problem of PR people when it comes to adopting technology? What do you think?
Yes. Yes.
Next question.
Yeah. Well, no, it is. If you have somebody whose attitude is, I don't need to learn anything new, you have a problem. If you have somebody who has a good attitude, but they fundamentally just have no aptitude to do that thing, you're putting them in a bad situation, right? If somebody who is not a writer and they put them in a writing position, you're in trouble. But if they're really good at like audio engineering, have them do a podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Someone's saying, can someone post a link to Christopher's bio? We can. It is on. I'll put a link in after. In fact, Caitlin, could you put a link into the current PR Roundtable episode? I think it's /PR Roundtable /.
Just go to trustinsights.ai. My bio's on that site.
I'll go there. Also, like, his Twitter popped up a moment ago. We'll send it around. And there's another question that I had before around personal brand, because I know, again, with all these things that you do, you're a big believer, and something you mentioned in a previous conversation we had about this idea that these days, if you're a PR agency, say, you're expected to have an online following, or to demonstrate that you can get a following. And it's interesting because I had another conversation with someone who completely disagreed, which is always nice because no one's ever right. With a lovely man called Nadav, and he was saying that in his view, the role of PR should be sort of backstage, that you should be the one controlling the light and something else should be in the spotlight. And it's just interesting that you're having these sort of different views now because everyone has their personal thing if they're on Twitter or somewhere else or doing their podcast. And then there are people who are behind the scenes that are perhaps just you don't see them as much because that is the nature of what they do. But yeah, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your personal brand. Sorry for saying those words. I know that sounds really douchey, doesn't it? But all these things that you do and how they've benefited you.
Personal brand is a fancy way of saying reputation, right? Mm-hmm. It's your reputation. So to the person who disagrees, cool. Does that mean that you should not have a professional reputation? I would disagree. You need to have a professional. Do you need to be out in front yelling all the time? Hey, look at me! No. There are certainly plenty of people.
But do you think he will miss out? Do you think he'll miss out from because someone like yourself would be more visible, say, online?
Again, reputation occurs in different ways. If you are known as the fixer, like if you were the girl or the guy who can, fix somebody's Wikipedia problems, right? You don't need you need that word of mouth, and your reputation, aka your brand, becomes known to the people that matter. If you have a reputation of being outstanding in healthcare comms, guess what? You don't need a Twitter following with 100,000 people. You need a LinkedIn following with 400 or 300 or 200 healthcare CMOs, or even 50 healthcare CMOs. Mm-hmm. But they're the right people, and you have a reputation among everyone. Like, this is the person to talk to because they can fix your problems. So everyone needs a professional reputation. Period. I would challenge you to not have to find a place where that's not valid. But when you think of personal brand as sort of like that loudmouth influencer, no, not everybody needs to be that. But you do need to be able to demonstrate your work and demonstrate your value to people in such a way that word of mouth spreads about you.
Yeah, the same thing for brands in general. Again, it's the same thing just on an individual level. And you have all these different channels for communicating those things. And you use technology for it. And that is how we've come full circle to the end of the show. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been a delight. I need to ask you, I've got a note here that just says chocolate or beer. What do you prefer, chocolate or beer? Because Jesse likes to send gifts around to people who we've had on the show. And
if I have to choose, I will typically choose chocolate, also because I have children and giving them beer would be weird.
Especially Belgian beer, like it really knocks you out. It's too many percent.
Yeah, but a good Belgian framboise is something good. Is something special.
Thank you very much. Is there somewhere where people can find you? Clearly, they're after more from Chris. Where should they look?
You can. The two starting places would be trustinsights.ai and ChristopherSpenn.com. You can find everything else from those two places.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. If anyone watching wants a different topic discussed in future or has a suggestion of what they want to hear about, or just wants to say hi and tell me if I did an okay job this time around, please let me know. Yeah, did I get a mark out of 5?
I'd say 4 out of 5.
4. That's solid. That's good, but you can always do with improvement, and I will take that. Thank you. And that's all for now, and tune in next time. Bye.